It was Christmas Eve of 2020, and there was a company that, for whatever reason, was like closing their pre-seed round and needed a wire to come through before their investors' bank closed on Christmas Day. And so like a bunch of the OnDeck team is on vacation, like people are not online, and they ping the Mercury channel. The head of business development at Mercury responds, and over the next 3 hours, back and forth via Slack, they solve this problem. And they like get this fundraise closed, like down to the wire. And as that's happening, like members of the OnDeck team who are online, like OnDeck fellows, start like following along and are like cheering along with emojis. And it was just this incredible moment of like exceptional service in such a personal way that was like, oh my goodness.
Hi, Lauren. Good to have you.
Thanks so much for having me. This feels like a long time coming.
You're one of the people who I look up to because I've been part of OnDeck in ODX program as well. And OnDeck is famous in having a lot of partnerships and a lot of companies who are in OnDeck ecosystem. And you've been one of the people who actually almost single-handedly drive all of this. So, and not only that, but also I love your partnership from first principle philosophy that I think is really compelling. So I would allow you to kick us off with explaining what is partnership from first principle, and maybe telling a little bit more about OnDeck and how you think about partnerships there.
I think our conversation originally started with the sort of first principles of partnerships, which is actually a framework that I got from Christina Cordova, who previously led partnerships at Stripe and Notion, and who did this great interview with First Round's In-Depth podcast about it. So I can't claim credit for the original idea, but I think it's brilliant. And it's basically that you distill principles for why and how you do partnerships based on your company's values, your company's priorities, and your business model. So you want the reason you do partnerships and the modalities by which you do them to be really, really legible and clear and aligned internally and then externally. So something you can also take and explain externally to your partners and your customers. And so at OnDeck, our business model is our fellows. It's always been like about serving our fellows, primarily founders and other folks supporting founders in building their careers in tech. And they are our customers. They are in some ways our product, and everything hinges on attracting excellent founders and excellent fellows and then providing them with an excellent experience. So given that, we have these 3 principles for partnerships. The first is that our partners need to directly support or meet a need demonstrated by a majority of our fellows. So they need to answer a question super commonly asked by our fellows and provide just real excellent products or services to our fellows. It also means, because we are thinking about what enhances fellow experience, that with our partners, we need to sort of abide by the same policies that govern our community. So, for example, OnDeck is a like sacred, safe space. What happens in OnDeck stays in OnDeck. There are folks operating in stealth within OnDeck. So we are never, ever selling fellow data or fellow time. When fellows engage with partners, it's on a full opt-in basis. They know what information they're sharing and to whom, and our partners need to be fine with that. The second principle is that our partners need to be companies that we are excited to be aligned with and to be endorsing to our fellows and publicly. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bigger brand than us. In some cases, it's a very early stage startup, but it needs to be a company and a team and a set of people and values that we are excited to be in partnership with. And then finally, and I should mention, these principles are sequential. So like they are ranked in order of importance and relation to one another. So only after those first 2 conditions are met comes our third principle, which is that partnerships should be revenue generating for OnDeck. So there are exceptions to that, but by and large, our partners provide an ancillary revenue stream to OnDeck, which makes sense because we're a paid membership community, and that is the way that our partners joined the community. So that's how we think about partnerships at OnDeck.
I've been part of OnDeck myself. We probably should say that OnDeck is a big community of kind of around 10,000 fellows.
Yeah, just about now.
Amazing. And then I'm wondering, like, how the idea of partnership sort of started on OnDeck, and what was the first partners? What was sort of your learning? How do you start it, and how do you scale the program?
Partnerships actually started before I joined the company. So I joined as the 12th employee in September of 2020. One of the earliest employees, a guy named Brian Nichols, who's now at Hustle Fund doing amazing work there, he had done this sort of first foray into partnerships and built, I think, the first 4 or 5 partnerships. And those were with some of like the really like usual suspects, like founder tools and services that virtually every like ideation to incorporation stage founder would need. So it included law firm, banking, cloud hosting credits, etc. And then it sort of just like sat dormant or fallow for several months. He was working on another project within OnDeck that wound up spinning up into our OnDeck Angels community for angel investors. And so when I joined, I was working within the sort of fellow experience business. I was the first build partner, so like direct advisor to founder fellows, and started to see very quickly that fellows were asking questions about the same things that they needed. And that we were leaving a lot on the table, basically, and that partnerships could and should be a really key fellow experience lever. And so I sort of like picked it up, like DM'd Brian, was like, hey, can I like work on this? And just started going and started talking to would-be partners, started talking to fellows about what kinds of partnerships they would be interested in, and started building out our book of offerings for fellows.
How does it look right now to be an OnDeck partner, right? So I think obviously it makes a lot of sense to have, when you have this big community, to have partners who would give special offers to community. But I know that some partners actually take much more active role, right? And you work with them kind of more collaboratively and closely. So what is the best partner looks like?
So maybe I'll punt this back to you afterwards as a fellow, and would love to hear from your experience, what you've seen from our partnerships. But when we bring in a partner as a real like embedded part of our community, it is much more than like a perk library listing. It is that. We have a perk library. It's extremely well trafficked. We've built that out. If you're interested in talking about the partnership tech stack, happy to talk about it. But we also are bringing our partners in to be real like members of the community. So that's both async and synchronous. We'll do sessions with partners. We'll like co-host deep dives and fireside chats and AMAs. We'll bring them on to panels. They'll host office hours. In some cases, our partners have dedicated Slack channels within the OnDeck workspace, and they will announce new features or ask fellows questions or answer fellows questions or DM with them. So it's sort of like this experience of them getting on the inside of the fellowship. So we sort of treat their entire team like a fellow. And it's this experience for fellows that not only do they have like the best offer on the market, the best like deal or discount, et cetera, but they also have this white glove connection to a company. So like they always know someone on the inside who they can DM or email and know that they're getting the best available service. Often that which like really exceeds what a company of their size would receive. Because part of the bet for our partners is that like OnDeck is curating the founders who are most likely to be successful. So it's an extremely selective community. We are bringing in folks who are extremely ambitious, extremely accomplished, and are building the companies that are most likely to succeed. And so when a partner receives an OnDeck referral, it's like, okay, this person may be like just 2 co-founders on the side of their day job, but we know that OnDeck knows that they are very likely to succeed. So we're going to pay way more attention to them than we normally would. I'm curious what you have seen of this in your experience as a fellow.
What OnDeck is doing like really well is that obviously you scale the partnership is hundreds of companies, and so you're doing it at scale. At the same time, your partners are actually pretty hands-on, and they very sort of responsive, and they're also like doing events, and they like if you ping a partner in Slack channel, they would respond. I had a great experience with Mercury, for example, as we are recording this sort of Riverside, and we using the Riverside perk. I think the sense of community is also translating to partners, and I think this is what you've done like sort of really well. And just going back to you're currently offering more than sort of 500,000 equivalent of different perks, and you have many partners, right? And when I personally looked into like a library, and I'm like, oh, that is amazing. And probably they have like 10 people just looking after all these partners. But then it's mostly sort of you and then maybe your team, which is pretty tight. And can you talk a little bit more? How do you do that? How do you scale partnerships? Like when you don't have like a lot of resources?
First, I want to definitely set the record straight that I'm not doing this alone. I do have a wonderful team. And in particular, there's a woman on my team named Andrea Torres, who joined basically as the first like additional partnerships hire and wound up sort of spinning up our partner success function. So we pretty quickly realized that there were two separate motions going on. There was the vetting and acquisition and scoping of agreements with new partners. And then there was the implementation of our existing partnerships. And so though she's an amazing salesperson and an amazing like business development thinker, was like, we need to get this taken care of, and built our partner success function from 0 to 100. And so that's a huge part of it. I think like internal segmentation of the jobs to be done and awareness of where those resources, though limited, need to go is a huge part of it. I think the other thing is that, so you're talking about the partner library where we did a count 2 months ago. So it's a little bit stale, but as of 2 months ago, we had $825,000 worth of credits available to every OnDeck fellow. Yeah, so it's like pretty substantial. Not all of those perk providers in the library are partners. So we have this library, which is more accessible, more open. And then we have our dedicated partners, who are those that are much more embedded in the experience itself, who in some cases we're going to market with and have sort of like public collaborations with. And those you can filter for just those in our library. But we're certainly, I think, we have something like 300 to 350 different perk providers right now. We are not doing like full suite partner management with each of them. Because I think, and I'm curious like how you see this playing out, and particularly with Partner Insight and the goals you have around automation. There is something like distinctly manual about good partner management. And so like, what do you think successfully scaling partnerships entails?
I think you're right, but the way I think about it is like in any sales process or in like project management process, it should be a reasonable amount of things that help you sort of automate your day-to-day, right? So you focus as much as you can on sort of $10,000 task. Somebody from OnDeck mentions that, so you should focus on $10,000 task. Don't forget about like small tasks.
Do you think people know what that means? Though I hadn't heard of that framework before, but it was our head of customer success, Kelly Hook, she was sharing this concept of like spending your time on the $10,000 work, not the $10 work or the $100 work, and so like freeing up brains to like do the most impactful work, regardless of where they are in the organization.
The framework is amazing in its simplicity, right? So it's just to kind of focus on something that is most important and not just 10x important preferably 100x important, and just try to focus as much as you can and try to sort of automate as much as you can all other things. I do agree that partnerships are like sort of manual in its nature, sort of like not manual, kind of interpersonal and relationship based, right? So you need to lay the foundation, but then after that you've done it, you can take care with some sort of partner automation software or whatever process that you're running. So like I'm sort of wondering, how do you manage all this? Almost like $1 million perk library.
Well, as you've seen as a fellow, we run our community on Slack. So we also bring partners in via Slack, and very often we're communicating with partners once they've joined via Slack. We use HubSpot as our CRM. I'm a huge HubSpot fan. We use Airtable as our database for fellow activity, and also as our sort of backend database for a lot of our web content. So there's a ton on the internet about like how no-codey OnDeck is. And it's really, really true. So our perk library, for example, is an Airtable database with a retool skin piping into our directory, which is the sort of internal LinkedIn product that we have built for our fellows. So it all sits on Airtable. I will say we also use a tool called Switchy that is like a link shortener and tracker, and it allows us to track click-through on our partnerships. So we can see what traffic is or what lead gen looks like. We don't own conversion data, but it is really helpful to have those numbers. And then a couple other like interstitial pieces. We use Notion as our internal wiki at OnDeck. And so we're using Notion very often in our partnerships as well. We write our partner success plans that we then share with our partners on Notion. And then for contracts, we use HelloSign. So it's a bunch. Oh, and then there's like Zapier and a bunch of like Slack bots like tying this all together. So it's a bit of a like scotch taped no code Rube Goldberg machine, but it actually works very, very well at the volume that we're operating.
This is like actually what companies typically do at scale. Surprisingly, some enterprise companies, they buy sort of expensive partner management software, be built in like sort of software for growth stage companies. But a lot of companies are doing exactly what you just said. Let's talk about sort of partner excellence, okay? And I think you just mentioned like how do you manage partnership at scale? So can you give an example of of a partner that kind of exceeded your expectation, or maybe you exceeded their expectation, or you sort of exceeded mutual expectation? And then we talk a little bit more about the process. How do you do that? And we dig deeper into that.
There are a couple that come to mind immediately. I think one that you mentioned earlier is Mercury. So we've been partnering with Mercury for ages. They're one of our earliest partners. We've grown that partnership with them as the community has grown, as we've been supporting founders at later stages, et cetera. And I think what has really exceeded our expectations, especially as they've grown, and which like your experience speaks to, is just how responsive they are to fellows. So one of my favorite examples of this, just full stop for any partner, is it was Christmas Eve of 2020, and there was a company that for whatever reason was like closing their pre-seed round and needed a wire to come through like before their investors' bank closed on Christmas Day. And so like a bunch of the OnDeck team is on vacation, like people are not online, and they ping the Mercury channel. The head of business development at Mercury responds, and over the next 3 hours, back and forth via Slack, they solve this problem, and they like close this round together and get like all the wires. I don't remember exactly what it was, but like basically like get this fundraise closed, like down to the wire. And as that's happening, like members of the OnDeck team who are online, like OnDeck fellows start like following along and are like cheering along with emojis. And it was just this incredible moment of like exceptional service in such a personal way that was like, oh my goodness, like I would, endorse them so highly to any OnDeck fellow after watching that happen. So that was one favorite story. I think another partnership that looks really different, but that has been super successful is our partnership with Bubble. So we built a partnership with them around OnDeck no code. And it was before we even launched the program, which was operating on the thesis that there are tons of no code hackers and builders who are either building tooling internally at companies or are building side projects or are founding companies. And there are no sort of tool agnostic places for them to learn from the best and to go from like beginner to like, or like beginner or intermediate to like fully proficient, fluent, like technical founder, but on no code tools. And so that's what we were doing with OnDeck no code, and Bubble joined us. We were both like super young at the time. Like we were both seed stage companies, and have been just totally in the weeds with us in such a great way this whole time. So they provide an amazing, it's like $5,000 of credits for all of our fellows to get themselves started on Bubble, which gets you like a long way to like product traction. And also just incredible support. So like Slack channel availability, definitely, but then like these office hours and build along sessions, and they'll like hop in and screen grab and help you build with you. And we've just done so much stuff with the Bubble team, and they are so trusted within OnDeck. And now we've seen a couple like super successful OnDeck companies built entirely in Bubble, like well past MVP, spin out of the fellowship. And so it's, yeah, that's been super satisfying, and I think has exceeded their expectations in a lot of ways as well. So yeah, another favorite.
Both of those examples are amazing, and Bubble is such a good sort of fit to collaborate more strategically in a way, right? So you launch a joint fellowship. And I've seen the CEO of Bubble was speaking in OnDeck. He's pretty amazing as well. We're using these examples and shifting a little bit more towards kind of partner excellence. So in both of those examples, maybe less so in Bubble. So you had somebody senior kind of really heavily involved in these partnerships. Do you feel that for partnership to be successful, this should be the case sort of at all times, or it's more kind of more team efforts? And then when you start in partnerships, how do you make sure that you start them from a very sort of good place, high velocity, and so on?
I may bring us back to that second question because I'm really going to decouple them. I don't actually believe necessarily that you need to have someone super senior championing a partnership internally. I think it's more about finding the right relevant people within your partner company than it is about a particular like title or perceived importance.
Executive sponsorship. There's a term in enterprise sales called executive sponsorship.
Totally. And I think executive sponsorship can wind up being a bit of a vanity metric where it's like, oh, we presented to this person. It's like, yeah, but does that person actually care? Or does that person actually like know how this would impact their team? Or is it actually the person a level or two down from them who has purchasing power, who knows exactly how this would be used and what value it would produce, and is able to like experience the benefits of a partnership going well. So something that a mentor in the like BD space once told me is that your goal in talking to your counterpart in any partnership is to help them look really good to their boss. Like you want to be a partner or deliver partnership results that's going to make them look like they're amazing at their job. And so it doesn't actually need to be someone super senior. As long as they have the influence to make something happen and to really experience the benefits of it for themselves and their customers, I think you're golden. Obviously, it varies. Like there are companies that are different amounts of top down, or where every decision gets run all the way up the flagpole. That's not always the case, though. So I don't know. Like the unsatisfying, like it depends answer.
That is really good answer. And I sort of agree with you because I think, everything what you said true. Obviously, this is a sort of you probably as a partnership manager, you feel a little bit more confident when somebody is like CEO or like somebody is kind of supporting you. But I think if you have enough, credibility within an organization, you don't need CEO involvement. And I think what OnDeck team has done like really well, like in general. I see that you guys actually run as a process, like everything you run. You create a process and you run this process pretty efficiently. And I was speaking with someone who was in ODX, and he was saying that he had an interaction with your team, and then he said, like, I have so much confidence in OnDeck team because they have a process and they run process like very, very efficiently.
So funny. It always sort of like feels that way, or it looks that way from the outside. I think within every company, you only see the moments where that's breaking. But that's also just like startups, like high velocity companies are going to build a process and run it to failure and then rebuild and then rebuild.
Which is an amazing segue to the next question, which is like, how do you figure out what is working in partnerships, and how do you sort of scale what is working, and how do you scale up what is working and scale down what is not working?
Do you mean in running partnerships processes or our back end, or in particular partnerships?
I would also speak about front ends, about sort of relationships, figuring out which partnership deliver, because it's a joint efforts, and which don't, and how often do you assess that? How do you scale up and scale down?
We are tracking fellow engagement. So we set up a partnership when we have really good reason to believe that it will deliver value to a ton of fellows, and a ton of fellows will make use of it. Sometimes we're wrong, and it turns out that we misinterpreted sort of what a company offers or to whom, or a company changes their target audience or strategy, or, the market winds change, a new competitor comes along, or just like fellows are just not interested, or like not nearly as interested as we expected. And so there are cases where we've built a partnership and then been like, oh, we were wrong. Like, this is not as useful as we thought it would be. And so we, in some cases, will end it early. We're very committed to not locking in partners to partnerships that are not working for them. So we have contracts, but they are, we have very permissive, out clauses so that we can exercise them or partners can exercise them if something is obviously not working. And so if fellows are disinterested, we will end a partnership. Obviously we do everything in our power to not establish a partnership that would end that way, and to support a partner so that that never does happen. But every now and then we get it wrong. I think the other thing that will sometimes cause a partnership to struggle or fail is if they are just not delivering the same quality of service. So we have ended partnerships or put partners on probation for lapses in quality of service. So lapses in responsiveness over a sustained period of time. If we hear of a number of fellows having a bad experience with a given partner, we'll end a partnership. And it goes back to our first principles. Like, why do we do partnerships? For our fellows and for their experience. If a partner's not delivering on that, we don't need to do that partnership. And so that is something, I guess, how we are measuring this is partially through the data we're collecting from fellow engagement and click-through. It's through quarterly business reviews with our partners. So we're meeting with our partners at least quarterly, many of them more frequently, and sort of exchanging intel and keeping each other up to speed on conversion data, on fellow feedback, et cetera, as well as like planning our next engagements. And then we're also hearing about this anecdotally from fellows. So fellows are telling us what experiences they've had and where they've been overjoyed or underwhelmed, et cetera.
You have many partners, right? Like a sort of, I guess, hundreds of partners. And I was talking with like a large company yesterday, and they have more than 1,000 of partners. And I'm sort of wondering, how do you stay top of mind of these partners, and how do you engage? Do you feel like partner engagement being a problem that you sort of solved, or like what's your process there of engaging all these partners and making sure that they stay within OnDeck ecosystem, they deliver on their promises, and they also spread positive sort of sentiment around and then build sort of ecosystem of influence around OnDeck?
We don't actually really have hundreds of partners. Which is maybe like not what you want to hear, but I mean, we have hundreds of perk providers, but when it comes to actual partners who we are doing this really embedded work with, it's in the dozens. So it's like between 50 and 100. We are doing, so I mentioned these quarterly business reviews and check-ins. I think a huge piece of this is just good partner success. So the partner success lead, Andrea, has sort of built our end-to-end process on this. And this will include bringing that partner success lead in during onboarding or even before, in the final stages of closing a deal, so that partners get to know them and know that they have this point of contact. It's running a really tight onboarding process with these like templatized emails that we're then customizing for every partner, as well as a series of meetings that we're setting up and a partner success plan that we're documenting, which pulls directly from the contract we establish with them, and making sure basically that through onboarding, expectations are really, really clear, and that we know exactly who are our internal champions at a partner company, and who will be delivering on their end of the deal. And then in terms of ongoing engagement, I would not say we've like solved this. I think it's just a super iterative, like constantly improving process. There have definitely been times when we've slipped and when we have not delivered for partners in the way that we would want to, in large part because our business is somewhat seasonal. When we onboard a new cohort of fellows every quarter, there is a huge burst of energy and attention and this sort of new captive audience who's excited by all the resources at OnDeck and connecting within it. And then after a couple months, there's a bit of a lull where folks have pulled in all these resources and then like pull them back to their corners and go build. And so during those like months, we'll have quieter seasons where we won't have as much partner engagement, where I think it's easy for us to take that time to go back and build internal process and not be as communicative with our partners. So I definitely don't want to say like we've done this perfectly, but I do think the regular cadence of meetings and emails is a huge part of it, of what's, gone well. It also, this is sort of a like spicy take, but one of my like opinions on this is that I don't love partner newsletters. Like because we are on one side of a partnership with tons of companies, I receive a ton of partner newsletters from my counterparts where I'm on a listserv, and it's often a beautifully designed email with a bunch of updates from the company and what they're offering, and who their new partners are and what events are coming up. And they're informative. Sometimes they are valuable to pass on to the community, sometimes, but more often than not, they just don't feel very personal. Like it's like, you're sending this to everyone. There are bits of it that are relevant for me. Most of it is not. And it doesn't substitute for an actual touch point with a human. And so we've had a number of times we've come to this sort of like juncture of like, should we spin one of these up? And I'm like, I would rather not. Like, I would rather us just have real human relationships with each of our partners. And no, like we're just constantly sending each other little emails with the things that are most relevant. And it's much more like engaging with a member of our community or a member of our own team than with like a nurture campaign of external folks. So I know that that's like not best practice and not what most people in my position would have done. I'm curious. Yeah, it looks like you are ready to push back. Go for it.
Thinking from our lens, so like the way we, for example, solving this with software, we're not facilitating like constant emails, but we like do email notification when some transactions happen, like sort of lead updates or like task updates or pipeline sort of review and stuff like that. So we but we also try to kind of engage people to talk with each other, right? So like, you haven't been updating these partnerships like for a while. You should have a conversation. I agree with you, generally speaking, but at the same time, when we are sending like our updates to a lot of people, I'm personally tempted to write like a personal email, but you cannot really write like personal email to 500 people. So it's like a little bit tricky, right? And at the same time, when I receive an email newsletter from OnDeck, I do feel this like a little bit like, oh, they've been sending this to a lot of people, and I'm sort of one of them. But I still sort of open and I skim what is going on there. So I get some kind of nuggets. I'm sort of wondering if you feel that newsletter is not the right approach, and I think you're probably in a good position to feel that because you are sort of like one of a few big partners or like big communities that they like your partners might be a little bit more bespoke with, right? So what do you think would be like a good substitution of kind of keeping you updated what's going on without you feeling that it's just like a template that was sent to like a lot of people?
Don't know how prescriptive this is, but I will talk about a couple other things that we do. We use HubSpot to trigger ourselves to check in with our partners. So we use workflows to automate at the back end these, reminders for ourselves. This is not anything so novel. I think it really is about involving our partners in as many ways as possible in our community so that we don't see them as only partners and instead have lots of reasons to engage with them. So we will, I say this sort of often, and it is, I've been told not to, but whatever, here we are. I think our best partnerships are the ones that are the most incestuous, in the sense that our partner is also a fellow, is also a speaker, is also an advisor and mentor to OnDeck companies, is also an investor in OnDeck companies, is also maybe an investor in OnDeck, and or we are an investor in them. And so suddenly we have a million different threads of connection with our partners. We have partners where 10 members of their team are also in different OnDeck fellowships and like run into each other in the halls of OnDeck. And when we're so closely integrated with them and just communicating with them around lots of things all the time, it feels much more authentic and organic, and like, we don't need to give them all the updates at once in an email. Obviously, that is a function of us being a community company. So that is not something that every company can do. It is, pretty specific to OnDeck. But I do think a lot of this sort of like community management as an extension of partnerships or as an alternative to marketing is one way that that kind of engagement that's more casual and more consistent can be fostered for a greater number of companies.
No, I agree with you. Partnership seems to be much more sort of organic. And so what you're sort of advocating is that creating more touch points and more organic workflow between you and them, and sort of more engagement on both sides, effectively, sort of more organic. I agree. Talking about triggering reminders, this is sort of our choice in our software to trigger reminders. Be in touch with this person. You've been in partnership for a couple of years, right? And you also being part of OnDeck Business Development Fellowship, which is like a group of amazing partnership folks. And what did you learn about partnership over the last year that you maybe didn't expect before? And maybe what is sort of your advice to people who start in partnership today in terms of how to do that and how to, ramp up quicker?
Something that it took me a little while to learn is you were talking about it at the beginning of this conversation. Like, you can really be yourself. Obviously, you need to read the room and like be appropriate, but you can and should be yourself. Ideally, you are only representing or building partnerships on behalf of a company that you fully stand behind and are speaking honestly for. But like, no one wants to work with like polished, stiff salesperson. Like, it shouldn't feel like sales. It should feel like a real relationship, or like, some of these partnerships have turned into real friendships. And so you can come as yourself when you don't know the answers to things. You can admit that. You can, obviously, again, when it's appropriate, make a distinction of when your opinion differs from the opinion or the approach of your company at large. And you can really sort of be there on a team with your counterpart at the other company. So you're on your own team, and then you sort of build this new little ad hoc team with your counterpart to build a good partnership. And then they're taking that back to their own team. So I think for a while I was just like so stiff and nervous all the time. And it is, I don't know, it's sort of hard to like say that or just like hear that and know it. But I think folks should come in as themselves wherever they can. The other thing that, again, I think I've learned gradually as my instincts have honed a little bit is that if a partnership feels off, it probably is. Like, if something doesn't feel well aligned, or if you don't feel like you can say absolutely yes to a partnership, it's probably not going to be super successful. Like, every now and then there are exceptions, but because it's so relational and because incentives need to be so aligned, if you are not sure that your own company's incentives are aligned, if you are not sure that you want to keep working with these people, or that like the other company, is represented by folks who you trust and respect and want to spend time with, like, probably all of those instincts are worth listening to. And yeah, to have oneself wherever possible in a position of strength where you're not relying on each partnership, but are able to be selective and say no to partnerships that feel off is a real asset.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So my last question. So looking forward, and OnDeck went through like a pretty substantial transformation, sort of back and forth, I would say. And now you are sort of focusing on the core of your strengths when you're focusing on OnDeck Founder Fellowship, and you're looking forward in sort of partnership lens. What are you most excited about looking into next year, let's say?
I'm really excited for OnDeck to focus on what it does best. It is very much closer to the company I joined 2 years ago than it is to the company that it was 8 months ago, in the sense that we are back to this ruthless focus on founders and folks most critical to founders' success. And we spun out our other business where we were successfully helping folks build their careers in tech as functional leaders, into this other company that can follow those discrete goals, and where we can have some mutual support. But I'm really excited to just deliver the core product really, really well. And I think OnDeck, as you've mentioned, has gone through a number of cycles, and you've been a fellow for a while now, so you've seen some of that growth. You've seen us kill some of our darlings. It's not to say it's been a smooth teleological line here, but I think the ability now to have our best people focused on the thing that we've always done well, which is founder support, is just really exciting. It also, I think we were anticipating that we would see less interest in our programs right now for a couple reasons. One, being the market. Primarily, we thought that a lot of early stage founders would not be interested in founding a company right now. And we thought that a lot of later stage founders would be on in extreme austerity and not spending money on professional development and growth. And we found neither to be true. So there are a lot of people sort of heeding the call to action of lean times are a great time to start a company. And be skeptical of VC potentially. And so OnDeck doesn't require that you take any investment or give up any equity. And there are a lot of people who are really excited to be building right now. And so we're seeing just excellent people coming into the community. And then later stage founders are finding themselves maybe more than ever in need of a brain trust of peers who they can talk to outside of their own company. So, when your super founder-friendly investor is suddenly not that founder-friendly, and maybe your company is going through challenges of its own, having that sacred peer group is super valuable. So, again, with OnDeck Scale, we're just seeing a ton of interest. And then what else am I most excited about? I think the thing that has always gotten me most excited about OnDeck, and which is just continually true, is that you can check the receipts and see all the impact it's had. We have this really fun, tight feedback loop because we're working with people who are building at such high velocity. So we can just see and hear from our fellows how transformative OnDeck has been for them. And that continues to be true. So all of those little flywheels and all of those sparky interactions where folks are finding their co-founder, finding their first investor, finding their first employee, finding product market fit, all of that is happening, and it's happening at such a fast clip. And so it's just motivating to do that every day and to facilitate that every day.
It does look like you're excited about a lot of things, which is fantastic. I think just echoing what you mentioned, I think fundamentals haven't really changed. People want to have a great community, sort of highly selected people around them, right? And then sort of tech generally is not going away. I mean, it's just going to be growing and growing and growing. Yes, there's a setback sort of through the markets, but I don't think people believe that it's going to be it changes fundamentals, sort of first principles, going back to first principles. Look, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. I'm sure that some people would love to speak with you. What is the best way to reach out to you?
If you're interested in learning more about OnDeck, our landing page is beondeck.com. We're also very prolific on Twitter at beondeck. That's the best way. You can find me on LinkedIn. I check LinkedIn. That works.
I hope that we have a chance to speak one more time, but for now, I'm looking forward to following success of OnDeck and being part of it. So thank you so much, Lauren, for all your work that you've done in OnDeck, and appreciate your time today.
Thank you for having me on.